The coffee mug slipped from my fingers, shattering against the worn linoleum floor of my cramped Rock Springs apartment, its dark stains spreading like accusations I couldn't answer. I was 65, still cleaning up messes that weren't entirely my fault, when Mrs. Larson's voice sliced through the thin walls. "Your damn sprinklers are drowning my roses again." "Tom." I grabbed a rag, kneeling among the ceramic shards. The ache in my knees, a reminder of years spent keeping the lights on at the power plant, a job that paid the bills but never won me any medals. The sprinkler system I'd rigged last month had a faulty valve spraying water over the property line every few days. I'd promised Mrs. Larson a fix, but her patience was as brittle as the mug I'd just broken. The phone rang a shrill interruption, cutting through her complaints about property values and inconsiderate tenants. I ignored it, focusing on the coffee pooling beneath my worn sneakers, but the ringing persisted, relentless as a debt collector. On the sixth ring, I tossed the soaked rag into the sink and answered. "Tom Harper speaking." "Mr. Harper, this is Susan Carter from Carter and Ellis Associates in Cheyenne." Her voice carried that polished, cautious tone I'd come to recognize over decades, the kind that delivered news you didn't want to hear. "I'm calling regarding Laura Catherine Mitchell." My hand tightened around the receiver. No one had called Laura by her full name in my presence for 15 years. "What about her?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. "I'm very sorry to inform you that Mrs. Mitchell passed away on Monday evening. The funeral is scheduled for Friday at 2:00 p.m. at Riverside Memorial Chapel." The words landed like a physical blow, knocking the air from my lungs. I sank into the kitchen chair, its familiar creak too loud in the sudden silence. Monday evening, 3 days ago, while I'd been wrestling with sprinklers and spilled coffee, Laura vibrant, relentless, Laura was gone. "Are you there, Mr. Harper?" Susan's voice pulled me back. "Yes," I said, my voice sounding like it belonged to someone else. "How did you get my number?" "You were listed in Mrs. Mitchell's personal effects as an emergency contact. I understand you were previously married." Previously married. 22 years of love fights and promises reduced to a bureaucratic footnote. "We divorced in 2010, I said, the words automatic, worn smooth by years of forms and explanations. "I see. There will be a reading of the will following the service. You're named as a beneficiary, so your presence would be appreciated." Beneficiary. The word felt alien, like it had wandered into the wrong conversation. Laura had built her empire after our divorce, turning a small consulting firm into a juggernaut that filled newspaper headlines I could barely comprehend. What could she possibly have left me? Through the kitchen window, I saw Mrs. Larson inspecting her waterlogged roses, hands on hips, her scowl promising another confrontation. But her complaints seemed distant now, like static from a radio in another room. "Which chapel did you say?" "Riverside Memorial on Grand Avenue." "The service begins at 2:00, followed by a reception. The will reading is at 4:30 in our offices downtown." I nodded, though she couldn't see me. "I'll be there." After hanging up, I sat frozen, staring at the phone, as if it might ring again, with different news. The coffee stains on the floor had begun to set dark rings I'd need to scrub later, but I couldn't move. Laura Catherine Mitchell, the woman who'd once argued with a diner manager over hiring practices, who'd laughed at my terrible plumbing stories, who'd promised me forever under a September sky, she was gone. The afternoon light slanted through the window, catching dust motes that danced like fragments of memories I'd buried deep. I was still sitting there, lost in the weight of it all, when the doorbell buzzed sharp and insistent. I shuffled to the door, expecting another lecture from Mrs. Larson. But instead, I found my son, Ethan, standing on the cracked concrete porch. At 37, he carried Laura's sharp cheekbones and commanding presence, his tailored suit screaming success I'd never touched. Beside him stood Claire Donovan, the CFO of Laura's company, her sleek black dress and cold smile sharp as a blade. Her eyes scanned me like I was a ledger entry she'd already written off. "Dad Ethan," said his voice dripping with disdain, "what makes you think you're welcome at Mom's funeral?" His words hit harder than the news of Laura's death. Each syllable a reminder of the chasm between us. He stepped closer, his expensive cologne stinging my nose. "You walked away from us 15 years ago. Mom made sure you'd get nothing from her $50 million estate." Nothing. Claire's lips curved into a smirk, her manicured nails tapping against her purse. "We've already spoken to the lawyers, Tom. Everything's arranged. You'd only embarrass yourself showing up dragging your sad little life into her legacy." Her voice was smooth, practiced, the kind of tone that closed million-dollar deals and crushed anyone in her way. I gripped the doorframe, steadying myself against their venom. "I'm going to pay my respects, Ethan." "That's all? Pay your respects." Ethan laughed, a bitter sound that echoed in the quiet street. "You lost that right when you gave up on her. On us. Mom built an empire while you were fixing sprinklers and whining about her success. Stay home, Dad. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." Claire leaned in, her smile sharpening. Laura deserved better than a man who couldn't keep up. We've made sure her wishes are clear. You're not part of them. She turned to Ethan, nodding slightly, as if signaling the end of a well-rehearsed performance. They walked back to Ethan's gleaming BMW, leaving me standing in the doorway, the weight of their words pressing against my chest like a stone. I closed the door, my hands trembling. The coffee stains stared up at me from the floor, a reminder of the small, messy life I'd built since Laura left. But something in Claire's smug certainty, in Ethan's casual cruelty, lit a spark of defiance I hadn't felt in years. They thought they'd won before the game even started. They were wrong. The afternoon light faded outside my apartment window, leaving the coffee stains on the linoleum floor, like dark omens of the confrontation to come. Ethan's words, "You'd get nothing from her $50 million estate," echoed in my head, sharp as broken glass. But they couldn't drown out the older, softer memories that pulled me back to 1987. I closed my eyes, and there she was, Laura Catherine Mitchell, standing in Murphy's Diner on a snowy February evening, her red wool coat glowing like a beacon against the fluorescent glare. She was tearing into the manager with a voice that could cut steel, her dark hair catching the light as she leaned across the counter. "You're telling me you won't hire women for weekend shifts because they can't handle the pressure." Her words carried across the nearly empty diner, clear and uncompromising, each syllable a challenge. "That's the most absurd thing I've heard all month, and I've heard plenty." I stopped mid-bite, my fork hovering over a slice of apple pie transfixed by her fire. Her profile, sharp cheekbones, determined jaw was magnificent in its anger, and I found myself rooting for her to keep going, to dismantle the manager's flimsy logic piece by piece. "Ma'am, no offense," meant the manager stammered, his face red as the ketchup bottles on the counter. "No offense" meant just discrimination intended. Laura slid a business card across the counter with the precision of a fencer landing a strike. "When you decide to hire based on qualifications instead of outdated nonsense, call me." The door chimes jingled as she left her red coat a splash of defiance against the snow. The diner felt emptier without her, like the air had lost its charge. That one's trouble, the manager muttered loud enough for the whole place to hear. I stood leaving a $5 bill beside my half-eaten pie. No, I said, surprising myself with the certainty in my voice. That one's extraordinary. I memorized the name on her abandoned card, Laura Chen Business Consultant, and stepped into the February wind, her phone number burning in my mind like a promise. It took me 3 days to muster the courage to call. When I did, she answered on the second ring, her voice brisk but warm. Laura Chen. This is Tom Harper. We haven't met, but I saw you at Murphy's Diner on Friday. A pause, then a laugh, light and genuine. The guy with the apple pie who stood up for me. I heard you from the parking lot getting my gloves. You left a good tip, too. I grinned, my nerves easing. So, Laura Chen, can I take you somewhere better than Murphy's for dinner, I mean? Another pause, longer this time. Is this a date, Tom Harper? Or do you need business advice? Definitely a date. Though if you've got tips on convincing brilliant women to say yes, I could use the consultation. She laughed again, a sound that made my pulse race. Saturday, Romano's on 3rd Street, 7, row 0. She wore that same red coat to dinner, but beneath it was a black dress that stole my breath. We talked for 3 hours, her childhood in California, my shifts at the power plant, our shared love of old westerns and dog-eared paperbacks. When she laughed at my story about flooding my apartment, trying to fix a leaky faucet, I knew I was falling hard and fast. 6 months later, I proposed in that same diner, sliding a ring across the counter where her business card had been. Marry me, Laura Chen. Make me the luckiest man in Wyoming. Her eyes shone as she said yes before I'd even finished asking. Our wedding was a September blaze, the sun gilding the wildflowers she carried in her grandmother's altered dress. My hands shook as I slipped the ring onto her finger. Forever, she whispered. And I believed her with every fiber of my being. Ethan arrived 2 years later, a red-faced miracle who filled our small house with chaos and joy. I stood in the hospital room watching Laura cradle him with the fierce tenderness she brought to everything, and thought this moment, this perfect, messy moment, was all I'd ever need. But even then, I noticed her eyes drifting to the business magazine on the nightstand, her fingers twitching as if already reaching for the next challenge. As Ethan grew, so did Laura's ambitions. When he was 7, she bought him a computer, not a toy, but a real machine worth more than my monthly paycheck. He needs to understand technology, she said, watching him navigate programs I couldn't pronounce. The future belongs to kids who think digitally. I suggested teaching him to fish, to feel the weight of a rod and the pull of a trout. She laughed. But there was an edge to it, like I'd missed some critical memo. Fishing won't get him into Stanford, Tom. We moved to Crestwood Avenue, a house with 3 bathrooms and a kitchen island bigger than our old apartment. Laura's consulting firm had landed a contract with a national energy company, and suddenly money poured in money for things I'd never imagined needing. A housekeeper came twice a week. Our fridge dispensed ice through the door. Ethan's bedroom looked like a toy store had exploded. Isn't this wonderful? Laura asked one evening, gesturing at our new dining room, its crystal chandelier glinting like a crown. We can finally entertain properly. I missed our old kitchen table scarred from Ethan's crayon projects and our late-night talks. The new one reflected every fingerprint, demanding coasters and careful manners. The entertaining began almost immediately. business associates, clients, couples whose conversations spun around mergers and market shares. I'd wear my best shirt, try to keep up, but their talk of hedge funds and corporate strategies felt like a language I'd never learned. "Tom works at the power plant," Laura would say when asked, and I'd hear a new note in her voice, not pride, but a faint apology, as if my job needed justifying. That's when Claire Donovan entered our lives. She was Laura's new hire, a sharp-eyed woman in her late 20s with a smile that never reached her eyes. She had a knack for numbers and a way of looking at people like she was calculating their net worth. Laura trusted her implicitly, calling her the future of the firm. But I saw how Claire lingered near Ethan, praising his computer skills, whispering about how his mother's vision would change the world. Once I overheard her tell him, "Your dad's nice, Ethan, but he's stuck in the past. People like us, we build the future." He was only 10, but he nodded his eyes wide with admiration. By the time Ethan was 12, he was tagging along to Laura's business conferences, charming her tech-savvy clients with talk of coding and algorithms. Claire encouraged it, slipping him books on finance, telling him, "You're going to be bigger than your mom someday." I'd suggest a camping trip, a chance to roast marshmallows and tell ghost stories, but Ethan would roll his eyes. "Dad doesn't get it," he'd say, echoing Claire's words with a sigh, too sophisticated for a kid his age. The first real fight came on Ethan's 15th birthday. Laura planned a party that looked like a corporate gala-catered canapés, a string quartet, a guest list packed with business contacts and their polished kids. I wanted something simpler. A barbecue in the backyard, his school friends, maybe a piñata. "This is embarrassing, Laura," I said the night before, watching servers arrange floral centerpieces that cost more than my car. He's 15, not running for office. She adjusted a centerpiece with the precision of a contract negotiation, her eyes cold. "He's growing up in a different world, Tom. These connections matter. They'll shape his future." "What about just being a kid?" I asked, my voice rising despite myself. She turned to face me, and for a moment I saw something new in her eyes, calculation, not warmth. Being a kid is a luxury we can't afford. The world is ruthless. We prepare him to win, or we set him up to lose. I thought of my own 15th birthday, fishing with my dad, a lopsided cake gifts wrapped in newspaper comics. It had been perfect in its simplicity. The party went ahead, a glittering success by Laura's standards. Ethan worked the room like a seasoned executive, shaking hands, laughing at the right moments. Claire hovered nearby, whispering advice, her smile sharp as a shark's. But I caught Ethan once standing alone by the pool, staring at the water with a lost look that broke my heart. "You okay, buddy?" I asked. He straightened, slipping back into the persona Laura and Claire had crafted. "Of course, Dad. Why wouldn't I be?" But for a moment, I'd seen the confused boy beneath the polished exterior, and it felt like losing him all over again. That night marked the beginning of the end, though I didn't see it then. Laura's business consumed her weekend dinners, became conference calls. Vacations were canceled for client crises. Claire rose through the ranks, her influence growing like a shadow over our family. She'd sit with Ethan, reviewing spreadsheets, telling him, "Your mom's building an empire, and you're part of it. Don't let anyone hold you back." The anyone was me, though she never said it outright. Ethan started parroting her phrases, dismissing my suggestions of family game nights or hikes with a sneer. "Dad, that's not how the world works anymore." The landslide was slow, but unstoppable. Laura's ambition outgrew our marriage, and Claire's whispers turned Ethan into a stranger. By the time we divorced in 2010, I was a ghost in my own family, haunting a house that no longer felt like home. The gray Wyoming sky hung heavy over Riverside Memorial Chapel, its Gothic spires looming like silent judges as I pulled my 15-year-old Honda into the crowded lot. Mercedes sedans and BMW SUVs gleamed under the drizzle, each one a reminder of the world Laura had built after me, a world of wealth and power I'd never touched. I parked between a Lexus and a Tesla, my faded paint job an intruder among their polished chrome. At 65, I felt every year in the creak of my joints as I stepped out, adjusting the tie I hadn't worn in 5 years. The reflection in my car window showed a man older than I remembered silver hair, where brown once was lines etched deep from quiet disappointments. But I was here for Laura, to honor the woman who'd once been my everything, no matter what Ethan or Claire thought. Inside the chapel whispered money. Mahogany pews gleamed under stained glass windows, their colors casting fractured light across floral arrangements that must have cost thousands. At least 300 people filled the space, their hushed conversations a mix of mourning and networking, the air thick with perfume and ambition. I recognized faces from the business dinners Laura used to drag me to executives' investors, faces from a life I'd been written out of. I slipped into a back pew, hoping to stay invisible, but whispers followed me like ripples in a still pond. A woman in a tailored black suit nudged her companion, nodding toward me. Her ex-husband, she murmured. Can you believe he showed up after everything? The stories had grown over the years, painting me as the dead weight who'd held Laura back, the man who couldn't handle her brilliance. I'd learned long ago not to fight narratives that served other people's need for tidy villains. But then a voice cut through the chapel's hum like a blade through silk. Dad. Ethan strode down the aisle, his tailored suit moving with the confidence of someone who'd never doubted his place in the world. At 37, he was Laura's mirror-sharp cheekbones, piercing eyes radiating success like heat from asphalt. Claire Donovan flanked him, her black dress hugging her frame, her smile sharp as a shard of glass. Her eyes locked on mine, calculating, dismissing me in a single glance. The chapel fell silent, 300 pairs of eyes turning to us like spectators at a prize fight. What are you doing here? Ethan's voice carried across the room, loud enough to halt every conversation. His cologne hit me as he closed the distance, something expensive and aggressive. You lost the right to be here 15 years ago. I stood slowly, meeting his gaze. I came to pay my respects, Ethan. Pay your respects. He laughed, a harsh sound that echoed off the vaulted ceiling. You gave up on Mom when you walked out. She wouldn't want you here pretending to care. The crowd murmured heads, nodding in agreement. I caught fragments of their whispers. Nerve of him. Poor Ethan should have stayed home. Claire stepped forward, her heels clicking on the polished floor. Let's be honest, Tom, she said, her voice smooth as venom. You're here to play the grieving ex-husband hoping for a scrap of her legacy. But Laura made sure you'd get nothing. We've seen to that. Her smile was a weapon, and the way she said we sent a chill down my spine. She leaned closer, her voice dropping to a stage whisper. The lawyers know who really mattered to her. You're just embarrassing yourself. The chapel buzzed like a hive ready to sting. I felt the weight of their judgment, the same suffocating pressure from the final years of our marriage when Laura's success had made me feel small. But this time, I had nothing left to lose.